Hello, you guys. Today I'm going to talk to you about Hot Wheels and why they're so important, especially amidst this postmodern nightmare world that we live in. I began taking interest in Hot Wheels as a child because they're like a car, but they're much smaller. So children are not allowed to own cars, obviously. So I had a lot of Hot Wheels growing up. I have a lot of Hot Wheels currently, but they're mostly on display. But here are a few I bought recently. This is a Nissan Skyline. I think what you can see, what they've done to the Skyline is they've given it a migraine. Has a very large roof, which is interesting because Japanese people are traditionally quite small. I'm not sure why they did that, but it seems to be a trend with some of the Hot Wheels. But yeah, that's one of them that I like. Also have this. It's a Chevy C10 long bed. Now, I don't really like American vehicles because I am not really sure why. I guess I'm fucking stupid. Because there are some good American cars. Had a Crown Victoria for a while. That was a great car. It was very long and black. And it was pretty fun to drive. It had a terrible interior though. Very plasticky. The modular Fords, the 2 valves, are not the greatest engines, but it was fun. That's a good car. I manual swapped it, which made it a lot more fun than it was with the 4-speed. Basically a 4-door Mustang. This is a Toyota Alteza. You might recognize this as the staple vehicle for amateur drug dealers in the Ontario region. A lot of those types enjoy the Lexus IS, but this is the Alteza, which would have believe came with a Beams 4-cylinder motor in Japan. And this is right-hand drive. I've always thought the IS300 Alteza bodies were very aesthetically pleasing. Mainly because that was my favorite car in GTA, was the Sultan. I could never tell if the Sultan was based off of an Impreza or if it was meant to be based off of an IS300. But whatever. It's a cool car, regardless. I have another headache car that I purchased recently. This is a Mazda RX-3, and I like purchasing any rotary-powered Hot Wheels because I have an RX-7. The box on these Hot Wheels that I purchased recently, I mean, the packaging has been demolished, but I'm debating removing them and putting them in a new kind of display. Usually I just hang them, but we'll see. The RX-3 is a good car. They're extremely rare. The few times one comes up for sale locally, it's usually a pretty rough condition because, you know, rotary cars are difficult to live with. The last rotary vehicle that was common enough that you could actually meet people who own them in day-to-day life would have been the RX-8, and most people had negative experiences with owning an RX-8 from my anecdotal experience. I had a music teacher who had one at one point and said that it was a pain because of the warm-up and cool-down times with rotary engines, but who knows where the world is going So who fucking cares if you have to let the engine warm up and cool down? Seems like something a liberal would say, if I'm being honest with you. Anyways, this is a Volkswagen Corrado VR6. It's purple. I don't particularly enjoy the size of the wheels on this car or the fender flares, but it is the VR6 Corrado, so purchased it anyways because the Corrado is one of my favorite body styles of any vehicle. I just think this is gotta be one of the best looking cars ever made. And I had the opportunity to see a very clean G60 Corrado in person at a Volkswagen dealership. And it was really nice. Again, not a lot of them left around. I have a Mark III Golf that I daily, and that entire generation of Volkswagen is just about finished here in my neck of the woods because of the salt. And I believe there wasn't a huge appreciation for the Mark III because it was substantially heavier than the Mark II. The Mark II is just a much more interesting looking car. So it's just not common that you find people modifying Mark IIIs, but they're really good. I think, if you can get them for cheap, why not? I saw a guy on Marketplace trying to sell a Mark III Volkswagen, and it was an auto 2-liter. Same car as mine, minus the fact that this one that he's selling is automatic. And he's got it listed for 10 grand. That is crackhead pricing. I'm not gonna lie. Anybody paying 10 grand for a Mark III Golf, it's gotta be out of their minds. Unless it's like a 2-door GTI and it's like mint condition. But honestly, yeah, Mark IIIs are good, but they're not. There's better hatchbacks out there for the price range. I hadn't experienced a Honda in so long. I have driven EGs and EKs at different points in my adolescence, but never owned a Honda. I wanted a Prelude as my first car, but that never panned out. And a friend took me for a rip in an HA recently, and I was like, wow, this is so different from the Volkswagen. Mainly because the Volkswagen, you have to understand, has a torsion main rear axle, which is much, much more archaic when compared to the rear suspension on a Honda. Speaking of, here we have an EG. Again, with these oversized, looks to be like CCW style wheels, but it's a Honda, so they're probably XXRs if we're being honest. Anyways, yeah. Recently, there's been a trend on social media where I've seen 2 separate car influencers, I suppose, converting 4-door EK sedans into a hatchback by sectioning off the rear of the hatch and cutting the trunk of the sedan and welding on the rear hatch, which is really cool. You'd obviously lose a lot of trunk space, I'd imagine. Would the cargo area be even very usable anymore? I don't know, but they look super cool. I feel like the EG definitely could have used the 4-door hatch. I personally am partial to 4-door hatchbacks. I always think that a 2-door hatch looks better. I can acknowledge that. But the the experience of putting 5 people in a Mark III Golf and driving around in the 21st century is very special to me. Because it's a shitty little car for a shitty person. You know what I mean? Also have a Miata. Do I think that Miatas are gay? Yes, absolutely. I drove a Miata once. And it was a green one, just like this, with the Nardi shifter and everything. It's a really nice car. Very fun to drive. But you are indeed a homosexual if you own one. Which, for some people is okay. For other people, it's a problem. And this is where we're at in the world. The government is invading our bedrooms. Which means at a certain point, they're going to start legislating against Miatas. But it's a pretty little car, you know? I think the issue I take with these Hot Wheels is the wheel size. Especially when you come to these modern classic series, which some of the cars are modded. Some of them are meant to be more or less stock. But this tire and wheel combo is not something that would even be functional on a Miata, realistically. And that just grinds my fucking gears. I'm gonna fly off the rails. Honestly. I'm a menace and a danger to society. Anyways. You know what? There's a lot of people who talk about how the car scene is ruined because too many TikTokers get into the hobby now. And I think, you know what? Shut up. Who cares? Cars are stupid. I don't have anything else to say in that, and on that point, but what else do I have? I have a hard body. That sounds sexual. I have a Mark IV Supra. I have a Viper. You know, if anything, this Viper is actually one of my cooler cars. Get with these fucking wheels. This represented a time in American history where everything had a Nerf aesthetic. You remember Nerf guns? How colorful they were and how cool they were. Kind of reminded me of like the Spy Kids movie aesthetic or something. And it was all bright and teenage toys or Teen Choice Award, whatever the fuck. If you're Canadian, YTV embodies that aesthetic very well. And I remember so many American cars growing up, even as a child, looked like toys. Especially the Cavaliers and the Sunfires. I remember some kid's dad had a Cavalier Z24. And it was so cool. But even I knew that it felt like a toy. Like it didn't feel real. The SRT Dodge Neons as well were kind of like that. And I wonder, I've never been in a Dodge Viper of any generation. I've been on track with an ACR Viper, the new ones. Not driving it, but there was one at a track day. And that was obviously a really different car from the older Dodge Vipers. But yeah, I think that's kind of something that there is this weird charm with American cars. You know, because they can be so poorly thought out, they can be so cheap, and they can still somehow be exciting. And a lot of the time when you compare them to their European counterparts, a European car will be nicer to drive, more comfortable, more aesthetically pleasing. But there's just something about American cars that's kind of silly. And when you go back to like the 60s and 70s, those American cars are incredible. They feel so well crafted. Just in a very different way, obviously. But yeah, I haven't owned a lot of American cars. Like I said, I've only owned one, and that was my Crown Victoria. My Nissan Frontier I ordered new, and it was assembled in America. But it's still a Nissan. It feels like a Japanese American car. It really does, because it still feels like there's some cohesion, which American cars lack. But it's also, Nissans are always, the modern Nissan feels so cheap and plasticky and gross. And they've really gotten better at that recently, but I still find that the materials in Nissans are not up to par with other cars. But that's not inherently a bad thing. Even with the 400Z, I think people are hard on that car. But in terms of concept to reality, that car, to me, still resembles a concept car, which is super impressive. You know what? Fuck it. I'm gonna show the Supra. Supras are a meme because of 7-year-old Roblox kids now, but this is a sweet car. Epic, cool, 2JZ, make 1,000 horsepower from factory. I never liked Supra's Mark IVs even back in the day. I thought the Mark III is so much more attractive than the Mark IV. That's because I never saw a Mark IV in person until later in life. And then you realize how big a Mark IV Supra is. They are not small cars by any means. And the lower belt line of the 80s sleek aesthetic, the wedge shape of the 80s makes even a relatively large vehicle feel much smaller. But the Supra is quite stout. It's very round and heavy to look at. But a black Supra, a black Mark IV Supra with like brighter chrome wheels, maybe a gunmetal gray, but the one specifically I saw was on the highway just this summer. That was the best example of a Mark IV Supra I've ever seen. And it was bone stock body wise, just lowered a little bit on some nice wheels, great fitment, big single exit exhaust, and it sounded incredible. And then I kind of clued in, like, okay, I get the Mark IV Supra in the same way that I get an E46 M3. Because an E46 M3 is not a small car either. And if you come from E30s, which is what I have owned and I have had experience with, an E30 BMW feels very similar to a Miata. But an E46 M3 feels the most similar thing I can say to what I've driven is the Mark V Supra. And that's why I don't find that departure strange at all. I know when they came out, I was working for Toyota, and it was a really big point of controversy. And even I felt at that point in time, I was very young. I was still invested in that like JDM as fuck thing. But when you drive a Mark V Supra and you compare it to an E46 M3, they feel similar. And I would love to drive a Mark IV Supra because I feel the aesthetic of the Mark IV Supra, at least aesthetically and on paper, I could see those similarities. You can tell me if I'm wrong. I might be totally wrong. I've never driven a Mark IV Supra. Then I have an FC, obviously, because this is my personal car. black FC. I really struggled because my intention was to paint my FC green. But FCs genuinely look incredible in black or white. I don't know why. I think FCs maybe all around feel more visually pleasing than an FD. But an FD is just such a strange car to look at. And you always have comparisons between the FD and the C5 Corvette. Because it's true, they are very similar. I feel like the FD and the C5 Corvette both maintained that low kind of wedge shape, like just looked like an arrow kind of. Whereas a lot of other cars in the 90s started getting bulkier. I've never driven an FD RX-7. I love my FC RX-7. I think my FC RX-7 is the most fun car I've ever owned. I've owned a lot of cars. But when I purchased it, the previous owner had done a Bridgeport and some work on the motor. But it was on lowering springs and the suspension was a mess. And it was still a 4-lug car. So the only thing I've done to it thus far is been coilovers and a 5-lug conversion with the 4 pots off of an FD and stainless lights. And now with the coils and the larger brakes, it really feels amazing to drive. But the rear suspension is like super funky because that control arm in the back, it's like this kind of trailing arm sort of setup, and then there's like a link, a very small fragile looking link on the one of the rear control arms, I suppose. The rear suspension is very strange. But yeah, I think the FDRX7 is nice looking. What I really like about it is this daytime lens. So you can turn the headlight on without popping the headlight up, and it'll project through these lenses. I mean, they remind me a lot of the Mitsubishi Starion or the Chrysler Conquest. That's another car which I think is objectively one of the most attractive cars of all time. But I've never seen a Starion in person. I had an 82 Celica, which is same kind of idea. Huge lift back. Really, really long sort of C-pillar on the A60 Celicas, which would be a Mark III Celica or Mark II Supra. The really weird thing about the FC is it's shaped like the metal work of the car feels like a notchback because it has that huge glass hatch at the rear. So all of this section is just glass. So you don't even have a C-pillar. You have like an A and a B pillar. I think that's super cool. It's something that's very understated on this car. But the design is super attractive. And I know that at the time the Japanese were going after that European entry-level sports car market that the 944 occupied. And the 944 was a very underwhelming vehicle in a lot of respects at the time. So cars like the 300CX, the Supra, the RX-7 would have occupied that market. To the lesser extent, I'm not sure how popular the Starion was at the time. And if you look at the American offerings at the time, they were mostly front-wheel drive because Chrysler had a lot of groundwork to do to make up for the oil and gas crisis of the 70s, so they had to invest a lot of their time and efforts into the K-car platform. But if you look at some of the Chrysler vehicles from that time, they're really cool looking too. Remember the first time I saw a Plymouth Laser in person. It's a super cool looking car. Aside from the fact that they're front wheel drive, which I don't think is a strike against them necessarily. It's a super cool car. And I believe it's a 2.2 liter single overhead cam turbo motor. It's a Laser. And that kind of spawned this front wheel drive sports car idea. I feel that a lot of those cars are very attractive. Like the MX-6 Mazda with the KL V6. I believe it was a 2.5 liter V6, so a very small V6. That's a really cool looking car. And they didn't get that kind of respect because these are cars that feel like they should be rear wheel drive based off of the length of the hood and the body lines of the car. And that was really the case with the Prelude, because when I was looking for my first vehicle, I was dead set on a Mercury Supra. And the insurance was too expensive. So then I looked at a 5th generation Honda Prelude, and the insurance was too expensive. But the Prelude, I believe, is an H22 4-banger. Roughly 200 horsepower, I think. And that's another car that just looks like it's meant to be rear-wheel drive, but it's front-wheel. But they're such nice-looking cars. And when I was a kid, you saw them because they weren't that old yet. They were manufactured until the early 2000s. And Honda just felt like they lost so much steam going into the 2010s. Because the Prelude was one of the coolest looking cars on the street. The taillights were really aesthetically pleasing. I'm glad because the Honda community is so strong. I'm glad that more Preludes are still around. But it's not the favorite choice for builders, obviously, because it's heavier, it's a larger footprint compared to a Civic. Aside from that, I have a bunch of random Hot Wheels that have been gifts. Random little cars here and there that have been given to me. And I want to get some more pegboards so I can hang my entire collection. I have most of my collection up here and the rest on a shelf to the left of me. But yeah, since I was a child, I have loved Hot Wheels. So, hope you guys enjoyed that autistic rant. Shooting the shit. It's winter time. I personally feel fucked. I'm so tired. And I'm just vibing, you know? Sometimes you just gotta chill out and play with some Hot Wheels. I gotta unbox some of these ones in the more fucked up packaging and build maybe like a little display case in the back, because this wall is like empty. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next video, which I'm not sure what it's gonna be, but probably some more weird rambling stuff because it's cold and I don't really like working on cars when it's this cold. Anyways, see you guys.